So, what were the coolest toys and collectibles from the 1960s classic TV show Lost in Space? Let's find out. Movies,
music, and monsters.
Hey guys, Dan Monroe here talking about movies, music, and monsters. Ah, toys. Those incredible little things that brought us so much excitement as kids and still bring us a ton of joy collecting as adults. It's ironic to think that we spend most of the time as adults recollecting all the toys we had as kids and spending about 10 times as much to get them all back. My current collection is basically all the things I loved as a kid: Puffin' Stuff, Planet of the Apes, Lost in Space, Halloween, Battlestar Galactica, Star Trek, and of course, Star Wars. As I've mentioned before, I wasn't a first-generation Lost in Space fan. That was my older brothers. But I did fall in love with the series during the syndicated reruns in the mid-late 1970s. When I was about 9 years old, I began my lifelong obsession with building and owning my own Lost in Space robot, which eventually I did. I did do a whole other video all about how I built my very own Lost in Space robot. Again, check it out, link in the description. But now, let's go back, way back to the 1960s and talk about all those original, incredible Lost in Space toys. Lost in Space first appeared on network television in 1965, and kids all over the world were just clamoring for some type of Lost in Space toy, and a company named Remco came to the rescue. Remco was an American toy company founded in 1949 as Remco Industries, Inc. And starting in the late 1960s, it was known for licensed products from major brands like Star Trek, superheroes, Marvel, DC Comics, that sort of thing. The enormously popular battery-operated Remco Lost in Space robot was the only 1960s toy ever based on that character. The one that we had in our family was my older brother's, and as the younger brother, I really didn't have too many opportunities to play with it. And here it is. This is literally the same Remco robot we had when we were kids. The Remco Lost in Space robot came in two different boxes back in the day. Robots that were sold through Sears had a very plain-looking box, while the robots sold in regular retail stores had a beautiful color overlay of the robot toy and the Robinson family. And these robots came in different colors. Before actually opening the box, you never really knew what color you were going to end up with. There were versions that were all red, all black, red and black, blue and red, and probably a few more that I'm missing. Most of these robots had clear plastic claws, but some of the rarer versions actually had a highly reflective chrome color added to the claws. Really kind of cool. But I personally always wished that maybe it looked a little bit more like it did in the show. I was so tempted to take the robot and a can of silver spray paint, sneak out in the garage and paint it silver, but I just didn't have the nerve. Today, I probably would. The arms and claws were connected to a spring mechanism which could be triggered from the back, and it took those big old D-cell batteries in the bottom, and when you turned him on, his chest light would flash and he would roll across the floor, making a significant amount of noise. Super cool. Some of these Remco robots actually appeared in episodes of the Lost in Space TV show. In the episode The Mechanical Men, tons of these Remco robots were repainted black and silver and used in the show. There are a few versions of these floating around, but there aren't too many, mainly because Irwin Allen would give them away to the production crew and kids when they would come in to visit the set. How cool is that? You can also see a Remco robot in the episode Space Primevals, and again in the Great Vegetable Rebellion as a cake topper. Surprisingly, one of these robots also made a brief cameo on The Brady Bunch. In 1973, a Mexican company called MAQ produced their own version of the Remco, which looked suspiciously almost exactly like the Remco robot. bootleg, anyone? This version had more lights, spinners on the top, and a bump-and-go motor assembly. So, did you have a Remco robot? And more importantly, do you still have it? Remco also produced the Lost in Space helmet, which was really kind of odd looking, and the Lost in Space 3D action game in 1966. We got the Lost in Space Rotojet gun. This super cool gun can be changed into literally 5 different weapons, including a rifle, a pistol, a roto launcher, a sub-carbine, and a hand launcher. It came with 2 roto missiles and a shrieking space tracer and a launch cartridge projectile. I never had one of these, but the artwork on the box is super cool, and if you can find them, they are incredibly expensive and rare. One of these toys was actually used for promotional purposes for Lost in Space. Here's a shot of Will Robinson with literally one of the Rotojet toy guns. Unfortunately, Remco filed for bankruptcy in 1971, but was acquired by Azrak Hamway International, or AHI, which was a toy company in New York City in 1974. The AHI company produced their own version of the Lost in Space robot, this time with a really weird green bubble. Kinda cool, this particular toy was modeled after the first couple episodes of Lost in Space, where the robot was able to walk around, and they more or less replicated that in the toy. Of course, we have the official Milton Bradley Lost in Space board game. This game had a beautiful 16 by 16 inch full color board along with various game pieces that would maneuver around the board. Players had to travel over the wild and hazardous Lost in Space planet with the spinner telling you in what direction to move. Taking turns, you may even be forced to move off the path, or worse, into the Cyclops monster's pit, which sends you right back to the start. Kind of strange. I remember having this game as a kid, but I don't ever remember actually playing it. And what would any toy line be without the incredible metal lunchbox? Well, Lost in Space had one of those too. It's interesting that the thermos didn't really match the lunchbox. It wasn't a Lost in Space thermos. It was just a thermos with like astronauts on it. Why? I don't know. Lines are open, you decide. And don't forget about the incredibly gorgeous GAF Viewmaster Lost in Space set. Man, the hours I spent in front of a light bulb staring at these gorgeous pictures. Also, in 1966, Mattel did the Lost in Space Switch and Go set. These were heavily featured in the Sears Christmas Wishbook catalogs. Oh man, I can remember getting off the bus and racing right to the mailbox hoping that Sears Wish catalog would be there. Now, this Switch and Go set had a 3-speed motorized chariot with a rotating missile launcher and a Jupiter 2 spaceship and 3 space creature targets. I can't really say too much about this toy. We didn't have it, but I do know it's extremely rare and very difficult to find in good condition. And don't forget about the incredible Topps bubblegum cards. Unbelievably gorgeous set of cards produced by Topps in 1966. There were only 55 of them, but man, I remember it was hard to get a complete set. And still is. Believe it or not, I am personally involved, sort of, with the Lost in Space card set. In 2005, a company named Rittenhouse reissued the original 1966 Lost in Space card set. Kevin Burns, who was probably more than anyone else responsible for bringing Lost in Space back to the forefront in the 90s and early 2000s, reached out to me because he knew I was into graphics and designing, and he personally asked me to design and produce for Rittenhouse a brand new set of 55 Lost in Space cards as a companion set to the original 55. Whenever you bought a reissued pack of the original 55, there would be one of mine in there. And sadly, I only have one set left. And here it is, still shrink-wrapped right from Rittenhouse. However, I do still have all of the master production files that I created back in 2005 in my archives. I really should reach out to Rittenhouse again and see if we could maybe get this second set of mine reproduced. I'm going to have to work on that. Stay tuned. And then there's the models, the amazing Aurora Lost in Space model kits. Of course, there was the robot model with the very cool lightning bolt that we got to put together as kids, and 2 different dioramas of the giant attacking the family, one with the chariot and one without. And unless I missed something, I think that's pretty much it for the Lost in Space collectibles from the 60s. Now, in 1984, a Japanese company called Masadea released what many people consider to be the most accurate Lost in Space robot toy ever produced. It speaks in English and Japanese. It's weird, but this is the first time we ever saw the robot name as YM3. Why they gave it that bizarre name, I have no idea, but probably to avoid conflicts with licensing rights. Both the smaller 4-inch wind-up robot as well as the larger 16-inch robot were clearly unlicensed. In fact, the phrase "Lost in Space" is nowhere to be found on the box or the instructions. In fact, in 1986, they got busted, and production of these Japanese YM3 robots came to a swift halt. However, in 1997, Masadea received a license from New Line Cinema to produce only the small 4-inch wind-up robot toys. And that sort of makes the larger ones a little bit on the rare side. Then, in 1997, a company called Trendmasters put out a whole ton of new Lost in Space stuff. Partially because of the Lost in Space remake movie that was coming out. God, we'll talk about that in another video. Regarding the Trendmasters toys, this is kind of cool. Back in the 1990s, I created an officially licensed set of all the robot lines ever spoke in all 3 seasons of Lost in Space. I thought it was so cool because Kevin Burns sent those files to Trendmasters and other companies that were producing robot toys, and all these toys have my robot files in them.
Danger, danger, Will Robinson. Cannot compute. Programming data insufficient.
And if anybody is building their own robots, or you want to add one of these hundreds of robot lines to your own robot toys or models, the set is still available. Link in the description. We had the classic series Jupiter 2 toy with lights and sound. We had a set of Lost in Space dolls that were actually really, really good, including the talking carrot from the Vegetable Rebellion. Johnny Lightning produced a set of 4 metal miniature Lost in Space toys, including the chariot, the space pod, Jupiter 2, and of course, the robot. And Mobius Models released unbelievable models of the Jupiter 2 with a lighting kit that's available for that, the derelict, the robot, and reissues of all the original Aurora models. So if you didn't get them back then, get them now. It is so awesome to know that the passion for Lost in Space not only still exists today, but is also represented in all of these incredible toys and collectibles that bring us so much joy from the 60s right up until today. And don't forget about all those other amazing toys from the other incredible classic franchises like Planet of the Apes, Forbidden Planet, Land of the Giants, and vintage Star Wars, but that, my friends, is the topic of another video. I really hope you guys enjoyed that brief retrospective on Lost in Space toys, and if you did, please consider subscribing to the channel. I've got a whole ton of new videos coming out that I know you guys are just gonna dig. And this is awesome. I'm even collaborating with the incredibly brilliant and talented full-scale prop maker Fred Barton on videos about Forbidden Planet, Tobor the Robot, and many more. Stay tuned. As always, if you have any questions, drop them down in the comments and I will do my best to try to answer them for you. And please feel free to stop back anytime as we continue our conversation on movies, music, and monsters. Movies,
music, and monsters.